Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Josephine Watson, and I'm the Commercial Projects Editor at IGB, and I'll be chairing today's IGB webinar. We are delighted to be hosting a webinar with SafeCharge today, where we'll be discussing the state of payments in the gaming space. Recently, payments in the gaming space have rapidly transformed, affected by a fast-changing regulatory environment, numerous technological innovations, and the shift in the payments industry to a more open methodology. This timely and informative session, paneled by venerated gaming experts, will deep dive into the challenges that iGaming operators are facing and share their unique perspectives and insights on how to adapt and triumph. Our moderator for today will be Sergio Muscat, founder of Oxygia Consulting, and the panel will consist of Christian Reinheimer, Head of Payment Strategy at Leo Vegas Group, Raul Daz, Head of Payments at Virgin Bet, and Moti Bring, CCO of Nuvei, formerly SafeCharge. There'll be a Q&A section following the presentation. You'll see on the GoToWebinar platform, there is a place you can submit questions as we go along, so we'll try to address as many of them in the allocated time as possible. With that, I'm going to pass over to our moderator for today, which is Sergio, so take it away.
Thank you, and welcome to this amazing webinar. We have some really great panelists with us today. We will be talking about the state of play for payments. We will be going through some of the important aspects which we are facing today as operators and also as payment providers. So we have a panel from both sides of the field. I would like to kick off this this webinar with a poll, which you will see in your screens right now. So please reply. You have 30 seconds to do so. And this will essentially kick off the discussion. Okay, so I'm going to close the poll now. And yeah, so basically we can see that the majority of attendees here use multiple payment providers, basically at this point I would like to have every panelist introduce each other. I would like each one of you to essentially mention one thing that you see as a major turning point in the payment space that is affecting the way you think and operate. So we can start with Moti.
Hi there, I'm Moti Bring. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer of Nuvei, formerly SafeCharge. I joined the business beginning of September, so I'm fairly new to the business. But I split my career actually first half working on the merchant operator side, and then the second half working on the payment provider side. So I've had experienced both sides of it. I think a point that is important in the gambling sector specifically would probably go back to when regulation started to be introduced in Europe and payments companies started to pull out of specific countries that led to a need of companies to have backup plans in place. And probably you can go even further to 15 years ago, 14 years ago with UIGA when the US happened and a lot of the payment provider changed their risk appetite overnight.
Okay, thank you. Christian?
Sure. Christian, running the payment strategy at Leo Vegas Group. My background is actually quite the other way around, as Moti has just described. I was previously on the payment provider side and have now switched sides to the other side of the table, now working with the operator or merchant. And to me, it's not like this one thing that happens that is so furiously changing the payment space. There's a lot of them, and especially being an operator that is using multiple license in a lot of geographies across the globe, running a lot of different brands. It's not like this one thing that changes everything. It's like the mass of things that trickle in and the ever increasing speed that I think is the most significant.
Thank you. And Rahul?
Hi guys, I guess I am in some ways the new kid on the block, because while I've been in the betting industry for about 18 years, I've been on the payment side of the house for about the last 3. I spent a couple of years as head of payments at William Hill and the last year at VirginBet. And again, in some ways, to echo what Christian was saying there, it's the biggest change is that there is a lot of change all at once. You know, the brands that I've been working with have mostly been focused more on the UK, where things were stable for a very, very long time. And that's where the change is sort of coming in the sense that the shift to, you know, with PSD2 coming in, the changes with mobile. So, you know, you have to have sort of a mobile first strategy. So there are a million different things that are changing all at once. And that is really the biggest shift. It's not any single one driver. It's the fact that everything is changing.
Very well. I think that this is the points that you've made are pretty much items that we will be approaching today. And following on the poll which we just had, we wanted to start by discussing the idea of open and closed payment systems, where essentially we have a single point of entry for payments, or multiple points of entries, or providers that are now becoming more open to integrating also multiple other providers, and therefore providing a wider range. As such, I would like to start by asking the question about what are your views and experiences in regards to open and closed payment systems, and what do you see as the major pros and cons of each approach? And again, I would like to start with Moti here.
Yeah, I'm happy. So I think just to explain, because we had the discussion before, it's open and closed. I think it's looking into whether operator merchants work with one payment provider, multiple payment providers, etc. And probably when you're looking to having backups to your gateway or to your acquirer, or different alternative payment methods you're using, etc. I was actually quite surprised to see the poll split 74-26, I think it was. I saw in front of me. I was surprised how many use only one provider. And I don't think there's a right or wrong. I think different companies will have different strategy, different risk appetite, different approach to how they want to do things. And based on that, they would build their payment strategy and decide who they want to work and how they want to structure it. So I think we've seen many events in recent years that have led many companies to opt to having multiple. It could be technology challenges as some providers may have had that led to the need to introduce more. It could be changes in policies that led to the need to add more. It could be companies that change direction in terms of working with gambling or not working with gambling, etc.
Yeah. So essentially, we're seeing I think more operators sort of spreading out, and more providers essentially trying to adjust their own systems basically to work with the needs of the operators. And maybe from the operator side, you have some points. So Rahul?
I mean, for me, the answer is always going to be multiple operators or multiple suppliers. Now, the puzzles that I've faced in the last few years are quite different. So when I was working at William Hill and we had customers from around the world, the only way to provide a decent level of service was to provide more localized payment methods. And also with the volume of transactions that we were processing, it made sense to work with multiple card acquirers. And there was sufficient volume to make it economical to do so. Now, in my current role, where we launched Virgin Bet a year ago, we were starting from a base of 0. Now, it's a very different puzzle at that point, where it's a case of you have limited technical resources, where do you invest? And with that comes a lot of focus as well, because you're working with fewer providers. I mean, as a basic hygiene step, you have to offer cards and PayPal in the UK market, which is where we are working. However, in other markets, it's different. So you start from scratch, and then you have to figure out how to diversify as your volumes grow and you have more of a business to worry about. And that's basically it. It's, I think, finding, to use an often used term, it's about right sizing.
Okay, Christian?
Yeah, spot on, I would say. I think the most important is to choose the right strategy for where your company is at. So if you have just entered the market, you might be in a hyper growth phase. You're only working in one market. So you don't have to have a super sophisticated payment setup that squeezes out the last 0.5% of the performance, right? So I think most importantly is to be aware of what the requirements for you as an operator in your stage is. And then depending on where you're going with growth, it will kind of present itself what you need, right? Because I think what we all can agree on is that payments is a very, very local thing. Each and every market has its own specifics as to customer preference, available brands, available, let's say, rails on how to realize a payment, especially in our industry. So that will kind of, I don't want to say dictate, but will have a huge impact on your strategy, and will then also have a huge impact on whether you can go with one vendor or whether you can go with multiple vendors. Then, of course, there will be some very, very flexible, maybe more technical gateways that you can use to basically access a lot of solutions, but have one entry point. That will bring you so far, but it really depends on how many markets are you serving under how many licenses, and B, in what stage your company is in. Are you in a market where it's easy to take market share, where you have strong growth, or are you in a very, very competitive market where it's all about squeezing out the less percentages in performance, both on the acceptance rate, but also on the chargeback rates, for example, when we talk cards. So I think it's most of the time defined where you are at what stage you are.
Very good. I don't know, Moti, if you want to say something based on what Christian and Raul have said, and their approach as Nuvei in this area.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with what the guys are saying. I think it's important when you look into your payment strategy to be able to take into account, your ability to access as many markets as possible, to look into the optimizing of both the transaction flow and the ease of, customers using it, and the acceptance rate, and making sure that you have the authentic payment methods, because if one is not working, others will work. And I think finding partners that give you access to as many markets as possible. And I think what is really important also is that one entry point that gives you all that, because it makes the cost of running your business cheaper, because you don't have to worry on the multiple integrations. I think that ultimately you need to make sure that you address your basic needs as a business, looking into specific verticals. So if you're in the verticals where you have big events, high volume events, specific data, you need to make sure that you're set up for that. I think if you work on lower transaction flow throughout the day, then probably a threshold for certain activities or tolerances is different. So I wouldn't say there's one shoe that fits everyone, and you need to find the partners that can do that. I would like to believe that we can service all the different ones. But I think this is not about what we can necessarily do. I think it's about how you as an operator ask the right questions when you look into your payment strategy.
Fantastic. So I mean, you know, we've seen a lot of changes recently. We've seen some major payment providers face some significant issues. We have seen a lot of recent changes, new regulations, both from the banking side and the iGaming operations side of things, local regulations, and so on. Considering this, where do you see the payments industry heading in the near future, let's say, or the next year? I would like to start with Raul. So
this is an interesting one. I mean, it's more a case of, I think, identifying the biggest drivers of change in the short term. Now, for me personally, based on the challenges that I'm facing, it is very much about how do we navigate as an operator through this 3DS V2 mess, because it's been one of those situations where the different national regulators or the situations in different countries, it's diverging. And as an operator, if you have customers in multiple countries, you have to figure out how to optimize for everyone. Because anything less than that as a payments manager means that you're leaving money on the table. So the PSD2 side of things is difficult. The next thing is, it's also in terms of, and this is probably driving off the PSD2 piece, is it's created a whole bunch of new opportunities as well, in terms of things like, how do you send transactions to 3D? Which ones do you sort of, where do you use your new mobile flows that are available from the banks? But then some banks are ready, some are not. And I think there's a lot of complexity that comes with that. And it's navigating that piece. The worst part is, as mostly UK focused right now, is there seems to be a bit of a mismatch as well between the gambling regulator in trying to say protect customers in the domestic market from gambling harm, and they are starting to look at things related or regulations related to payments, and there seems to be a little bit of a disconnect between, shall we say, the FCA and the gambling regulator, which I think that could work better, because it would help to have clearer requirements for the payments function. Because if we have that and the two regulators are working together, then we can make payments work well for what the gambling regulator needs. So things like, there's a whole box of tricks that sort of come with open banking, for example, in terms of getting to understand a customer's affordability, in terms of, say, what you can do on the KYC side of things. So there are a lot of opportunities there, but I think it's a case of, you have turbulent seas right now, and navigating through is, I guess, the biggest challenge.
Great. Moti, what do you think from your side of the field?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a combination of two things. I think you have regulation, but you also have innovation, and I think these two, some is linked, as Raul said, with open banking as the child of PSD2, but other innovations that we've seen, Visa Direct being launched last year, Mastercard Send is being worked on now. So I think when you work with payment providers, for example, you need to make sure that they have the capacity of understanding the different regulations, and they have the resources to invest in a different innovation as coming and to be able to implement it, because you want to, as a company, as a merchant or operator, you want to make sure that you're there first, because if we've seen or learned anything over the last few years, is customer adoption is quite incredibly fast, and consumers expecting those payment methods to be available very, very quickly. And the easier they are to use, the more likely they are to be adopted quickly. So I think both are impacting. I think they have to, they're part of any payment strategy. I think Christian and Raoul probably have more experience. Christian, working on multiple markets, probably have a lot more experience than that from the operator side, with a plus and minus that come with a, I dare say, headache.
Yes, and in fact, so what do you think, Christian?
Yeah, right. Tons of wicked fun. I think the major thing that we are now seeing is an acceleration in variation. So it's not only one big thing like PSD2 open banking, which is driving change. That is one thing. It is super exciting. For once, it's something that is kind of regulated over multiple geographies, which is amazing. But then, of course, it hits the local gaming licenses and their requirements, and they're not all of the time aligned. So to echo what Raoul has said, that would be amazing if they will be a bit more similar, at least. That would be fun. So again, I think it's the many different things that are drivers. It's you have open banking, where most of the time people now talk about PSD2, but that's more than that. So there's open banking movements in other parts of the world. There is cryptocurrencies, which is a very interesting technology that nobody has really figured out how to use it in the best possible way. But we also see that there's a lot of companies that are wrapping their minds around that, especially with EU countries like Estonia coming up with regulatory frameworks that attracts talent to start businesses there and work on solutions. Then you will find that there will be multiple combinations of the same, right? So a PSD2 open banking comes with a lot of good stuff. Nobody, however, thought of withdrawals. So that is a thing that can then be solved in different ways. So you can combine, like, for example, virtual IBAN products with open banking products. So I think where the industry is heading towards to is a variety of things being possible. Then we will face a time where you see consolidation in each and every of these legs, where now the vendors pop up like mushrooms. Then some of them won't make it, some of them will be big. And I totally agree with Raoul that it's quite a challenge to navigate with that. So that said, I think it's also important that you balance basically your capacity to do payments as an operator to that challenge. If you want to be a multi-brand, multi-markets, and maybe multi-markets not only in Europe operator, it's going to be quite tough to do that with one person running payments and one system processing transactions. So again, it depends on where you are as a company.
Raoul, would you like to add something to that?
My network went for a bit of a blip.
Okay. So I mean, the way I see it, I mean, I guess that PSD2 and open banking will be, as you said, sort of major aspects of what the changes that we will see, and the development of new technology, and maybe creating overlaps, since there will be more accessibility to information and so on. So basically, based on this, I mean, what do you see as being the major pain points in this new development, basically? What will be the main challenges, regulatory, and technical, operational, and so on? We're going to see a lot of maybe flood of information, and systems that are maybe not mature enough to reach the customer. So how do you see this developing, and what are you preparing yourself for? Christian?
Sure. touching upon what I earlier said, I think it's important that you have the right talent and the right capacity in place in your company to tackle that, because it is getting more and more. So it's getting more complex, and especially when we're talking about regulations and regulatory requirements, they usually come with short to no notice. So you are being expected to comply with them in a very short time frame. They come from different areas, depending on how many markets you're operating in, of course, and how many licenses you obtain. So the more varied you want to be with regards to that, the higher the requirements to your payments team, because one person will most likely not be enough to tackle that.
Raul?
I mean, from my perspective, it's definitely about the team. However, you know, the way that I've sort of had to deal with this in the last few years is also to work with the different suppliers, and you have to sort of cherry pick. So, you know, what's very clear is that the entire ecosystem is changing, or every element of it. 2 years ago, when we started to see the changes coming through with the acquirers starting to implement the pieces with PSD2 and their own version 2 implementations, it was clear to me that we would start to see downtime at every single element or every single step of this. So we had scheme downtime, we had various acquirer downtime, we had, you know, and it was a case of if you didn't have a plan of being able to sort of flip from one to the other, in case something went down, you're, well, you know, in a bad place. And the same comes with the other elements as well. So it's not just the card providers or the cards network. It also comes down to things like the APMs. We had situations where the APMs were up and running in a country one day, the next day MasterCard changes its rules and they get shut down. Before that, you know, and it's one where the only thing that you can sort of be, you know, the only constant is change, to use a nice old cliche. And it's a case of how do you line up your fallback positions. So it's not just a plan A or a plan B, it's also a plan ABC going all the way down, and you've got to get everything covered. And that I faced most of all was how do you get that coverage, and the in-house teams, how do you get them to be able to adapt fast enough? And you know, the William Hill monolith is well known to everyone, so it's no big secret. But being able to adapt to new technology or to new providers was hands down the biggest challenge. And there were products where I decided that, you know, we are going to try and use an off-the-shelf solution wherever possible, as opposed to using, you know, trying to do in-house development. And you know, Nove was the beneficiary there on an entire product line that we were running, or an entire set of brands. So it's a case of you have to sort of adapt your thinking that you can't try and do everything in-house. You can't keep up with the pace of change, and you have to prepare for these multiple outlets.
Christian, I don't know, I think you want to continue a little bit on Raul.
Yeah, if you allow. So I think what we are sometimes forgetting is, because we're always focusing on what's the challenge of this, what is the, you know, what do you have to keep in mind. It's also a huge opportunity, because never before have you looked at a payment landscape that comes with so much variation, with so much different solutions to pick and choose from. Of course, there can be a headache, right? But it's also a luxury problem, because you have choice, and that creates quite some dynamics in the market as well, which we as operators can benefit from. So I think it's important to not only see this as, you know, a threat or challenge, but also see the opportunity in this and try to leverage this opportunity to the best of your company.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there, Christian. I think there's a huge amount of opportunity coming from doing that. And I think there's the innovation you see in payments and the improvement in transaction flow, for example, that leads to better acceptance rate, a lower attrition rate, etc., has worked really well. You mentioned something before, and with regard to challenges, one of the challenges that we have, I think, is regulator seems to be playing catch up with technology. There's a lot of stuff that is happening. The regulators and the schemes just don't know what to do with. And actually consumers and operators are ahead. And that's where some of the challenges are. You mentioned crypto before. You know, regulators don't know what to do with it. Visa and MasterCard are really struggling with it. So, and when you sit on the payment side and you have operators saying we want all these things, and you know, it's tougher to be able to get the landscape correctly when it comes to working on that side. And I think it'd be really, really good if we were able to get regulations to be at the same pace as innovation, because in many ways I see how it's suffocating it. We started doing it in the gambling sector, right, with too many regulations coming in different countries differently and the impact it had on the industry. And we see that in payments as well. And I think, especially when you think about the financial crisis we're going through now, anything that can ease such pressure on businesses trying to be innovative and find more ways to build and create would be great.
Agree.
Brilliant. So, I mean, on the flip side of that, you know, technology is always improving, is always offering new ways of dealing with things and new ways of getting better deposit rates, higher conversion, less fraud. And how do you leverage these innovations in technology, in payment technology, that are, you know, that are happening constantly, and that, you know, we know that will happen in the future, to achieve these better results, essentially? I think Christian, you can go with it.
So my background in payments, as working on the side of a payment provider, is with Klarna, a Swedish company that issues credit, basically, so pay after delivery product. And one takeaway that I have from working there is that coming to this industry, I think there's a huge opportunity in leveraging data that is currently not being tapped into like it could be. Looking at what was done at this former employee of mine with regards to leveraging data that you have to forecast behavior and preference of customers is something that I think the iGaming industry can adopt way more. So to come to your question, relating to stuff like conversion rates and chargeback rates, I know that on the acquiring side, a lot of people are already working with that, anticipating, for example, a risk exposure, and having automated fraud routes, or even machine learning fraud routes that dynamically adjust the take rates. But what about cashier experiences? What about anticipating customer preference by acquiring channel when it comes to what you offer them? Because there is markets, you know, it's pretty straightforward. Of course, you can run UK maybe only with cards and PayPal. That doesn't work in all the other markets. So you might have a bouquet of payment methods, but you don't want to, you know, scare away your customers with too much choice either. So leveraging the data that you have to anticipate behavior, anticipate a preference, is something that I think can have a big impact.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there. I think also builds trust with consumers, because if it feels familiar, if it looks domestic, local to them, then they're more likely, especially new customers, to feel more confident to use your site. And I think there are two ways you can do it. I mean, a lot of it you can do on your own. You can look into partners on the payment side that have the ability to help you to do it. But yeah, you want to make sure that if someone logs in from a specific country, it looks and feels like the preferred payment methods in that country. Completely agree with that.
Yeah, I think basically what you guys are getting at is friction, to use a nice term, is how do we lower the friction for customers? And to be honest, this is where the balance comes in, is if you look at, say, some of the new regulations where, and this is something that, perhaps we can get into a little bit more, is the gambling industry is typically viewed as high risk. However, it isn't from, say, a fraud perspective. And this is where, if you my biggest beef with, say, PSD2, for example, is that it is completely designed around reducing fraud, which is brilliant. However, what do you do if you're a merchant that doesn't have the high fraud rates, and that you are keeping up with the technologies and you are maintaining a low fraud rate? In that case, as far as I'm concerned, the only thing that this brings is challenges, and things can only get worse. And that's something where yeah, the regulations provide almost like an existential threat, because I don't want to have customers turned away for anti-fraud measures when I'm already doing everything I can. And to be honest, in the gambling industry, it's one of those sectors where we have had to use data extensively. To the first industries on the internet that were making money. There's there's an industry that starts with the letter P, and then there was gambling. And it's after that that a whole bunch of other business models started to sort of come in there. And we've been at the forefront of this in terms of trying to innovate on the internet. There's no sector that sort of moves quite as fast as we have. And that's the challenge, is, the acceptance rates that we had or have prior to introducing, some of the hurdles that balance that out.
Okay, brilliant. So I don't know, Christian, Moti, do you have any other points to make before we move on to the questions segment?
Not for me, no.
Okay, brilliant. So we have 2 questions from the audience, and this is something I think this first question is for all of you. There was an issue back in financial year 15-16 where several payment options were cut off. What is the risk that this reoccurs? I think Moti.
Yeah, the risk of that reoccurring, I would say it's quite likely. It depends on the markets you're in. So if you're in heavily regulated markets, even in the UK, right, at the beginning of this year, credit cards were switched off. And there was some notice about it, but it was still changed the landscape. If you work in regulated markets, the likelihood of payment methods being turned off is probably lower, unless there's a change in policy that leads to 1 or 2 payment methods being excluded. If you're in countries where there's no regulation now, what was defined as grey markets, and there's 50 shades of grey, then it depends on which shade of the grey you're operating in and what payment methods are there. And then if the regulators can force something to happen, or the schemes, or an APM. So I think, unfortunately, I don't see that ending in the near future. Yeah, probably just move to different regions.
Christian?
Yeah, agree. I think also not to be underestimated the political piece here, because of course the changes in regulation, they also strongly follow what people think or don't think is popular in the market right now. So yeah, I don't think that this situation will change anytime soon. So yeah, better be prepared.
I'm with that completely. It's all about the populism right now. I mean, even in markets such as, say, Japan, I mean, there was a period of time where I lost 3 APMs within the course of a year at short notice. And I mean, to me, for many years, it's become very clear that there is a difference between regulated markets. For a long time, regulated markets were viewed as sustainable markets, whereas for me, it's quite different. You have unregulated markets, and you have regulated markets that can be quite unstable. So it all depends on the mood of the powers that be in terms of, say, the regulations. And right now, we're sitting, the 4 of us sit here. We are governed by 2 masters. There's the payments regulations, and then there's the gambling regulations. So if anything, we're more exposed to changes geopolitical changes than anything else. You know, years ago, you used to be able to take payments in US dollars, and that disappeared.
Yeah, I mean, if I can add one thing here, it's important also to know who you work with on the payment side, because switching off payment methods can be done in different ways. Some companies will be faster at doing it, and others will have a different threshold of tolerance into how quickly to do it and how much notice to give their customers, their merchants, when they do so. And I think it's important when you work on the gambling sector is to make sure that you work with partners that their tolerance level is higher, and they're not just they're just in gambling because they happen to be there, and then they look for any reasons to possibly maybe change their risk appetite. And yeah, so then when these things do happen, and it will happen in the future, it's done in a way that you can limit the impact it will have on your business or on your customers.
Brilliant. So on a similar note, and maybe a little wider, there's another question, which is what is the biggest risk related to payments in the online gambling space in the UK? And I think that maybe we can also expand that to Europe and globally. But Raul, you want to kick that off?
I mean, there's an easy answer. It's the regulations, because in terms of the rate of change right now, in some ways, I find that the changes coming through from the payment side of the house or the payments regulations they percolate through slowly. So you have rounds of notice where, okay, this regulation is coming in the next 18 months. Start planning for it, because there's the whole ecosystem to drive through. The curveball seemed to come from the gambling regulation side of things, because those change quickly, and that's got to be the answer. I mean, in terms of, say, the new innovations coming, they're never really forced down our throats, in the sense that, yes, Visa Direct became available, but it wasn't mandatory for a while. The same with, if you look at the card bins, they're going from 6 digits up to 8. Visa announced that, 2 years ago? And they're still slowly sort of filtering through. So there is an understanding of the ecosystem that comes from, say, the financial world, that it takes time to get customers and the whole ecosystem along a certain journey. It's a lot trickier when it comes to changes from the gambling regulation side, because I mean, take a look at Germany, where all of a sudden you had payments blocking come in, and Christian, I'll let you speak a little bit more about Germany, but it's one where these things change so fast. As an operator, you've got to figure out how to react more to that than anything else. And there's one other thing which is there, as a payments operator, you actually have to watch out for what's going on in terms of M&A, not just in our space, but also with our suppliers. Because what has also happened is there's been a lot of consolidation and listings, as with Nuvei, in terms of being exposed to, say, the US market, where Visa and MasterCard historically have always been a lot more conservative, or were conservative, as long as Visa Europe was different, because the US risk appetite or views towards gambling are quite different. So it comes down to this optic side of things. So I remember when I was doing this at William Hill, and I was looking at vetting different operators or different suppliers for different markets, one of the things that I had to take into account was, where is this company from in terms of, say, the ownership, and what is the likely sentiment in their home market, and that then influenced how sustainable they're likely to be for me.
So Christian, from a more global point of view.
Yeah, please don't let me talk about Germany. Even though today is a day, right? So interim regulation. Anyhow, to come back to your question, Sergio, I think there's two huge risks, and the one is that we have been talking a lot about the different threats and challenges that we are seeing, and I think the biggest risk is being unaware what they mean for your particular business. So what does that translate to for yourself, and not being ready to deal with them. I think that's the biggest risk, because they will, as we said, there's a lot of change. It's not going to be less, it's going to accelerate. There's going to be more and more of that. So not being set up in a way to tackle that is one big risk, I think. And I think the other big risk is to just see all these developments as a risk and a threat and a challenge, because again, there's a lot of opportunity in there as well. So don't feel too threatened about it. Don't feel too worried about it. Also understand what's up for grabs. Where's the opportunities? Where's the change that can really propel your business forward?
Moti?
Yeah, I think I would like to add something. I think that we must not forget Brexit, specific to the UK, and what that can bring with it. From impact it could have on some payment methods to cost of processing. If the UK does not sit within the EU, and the implication it can have, for example, on how it's being seen by Visa and MasterCard, or any other cost-related aspect of it, that can have an impact. I think what it also does is it forces companies to divert resources to deal with whatever will be the fallout of that, which means you can't invest in innovation or in new technology and things you'd want to do. And 2 months to go, and it's still not very clear what it's going to look like. So I think, at least for the near future, that would be. But I think I have to agree with Christian here. There's huge amounts of opportunities as well. And I think if we've seen anything over the last few years, even PSD2, all these regulations which are suffocating and not necessarily consumer friendly, etc., bring with them innovation and new ideas of how you can do things better, and how you can have a better transaction flow and access more consumers, and how you can use that, for example, open banking to have a better understanding of your customers, right? So human nature and in the field of fintech means that for all these things, there's always going to come something out of it that would be, we will suddenly realize that we miss it all this time, and it's going to make life better. So there is plus to it as well.
Absolutely, totally agree with that. So to close off, I think this has been a very informative session. Thank you, all of you. I just wanted to allow you to sort of close this session with one piece of advice. What would be, if you could give one piece of advice to someone within the payments industry and in iGaming, an operator or a provider, technology provider, and so on, what would that be? Raul?
I've read a lot on the internet about what we should be doing and shouldn't be doing based on the various regulations and the opportunities and threats and everything. And at the end of it, I've come to the simple conclusion that it is all about figuring out what is most appropriate for you as a business. And that, I think, is the magic in what we do, is to figure out where the opportunities lie, as Christian very rightly has sort of pointed out, is how can we make the money for the business in terms of getting the transactions through, and how do you safeguard the business in terms of, say, the risk management. And I think it's a case of you need to be very self-aware, and it's a read, but don't believe everything you read. You have to look at it with a skeptical eye and figure out what applies to you and what you should just.
Absolutely. Christian?
Yeah, there's a lot of magical wonders out there, right? That will solve everything. No, I don't really have to add something to it. I think Raul is spot on. So you need to be aware of your situation. You need to be aware of what your company is capable of. You need to be aware that payment is a very local thing, and you need to be aware of what your company's next steps are with regards to expansion and growth. And then these three things will help you to figure out what's the best strategy, also with regards to going for one or a multiple provider setup, as we started off with that question. That will help you figure that out.
And Moti?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the best thing you can know is have no end point to your payment strategy, and just realize that it needs to keep on changing all the time and adjusting to what's come, being regulations, technology, etc. and just be curious to what's out there constantly.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Moti, Christian, and Rahul. It's been a really fun and informative session, and thank you everyone for attending, and I will close off here.
Thanks so much for that, guys. A fantastic panel from everyone. Some really great insights shared. For anyone who didn't get their questions answered today, do please continue to send them in to info@igamingbusiness.com, and we'll try and get them over to the panel so we can get any answers for things that we didn't get around to. Otherwise, you can go on igamingbusiness.com to watch this webinar on demand, share it with your colleagues, and rewatch it for your own information. Otherwise, it's been great having you all, and we'll see you soon. Bye, guys.
Cheers.
Bye.